Okay. Can you hear me all right? Is this thing on? Excellent. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for making it out on a Saturday. Appreciate it. So we're going to talk about the future of the CMS. We're going to talk about headless architecture, multiple front ends, and content as a service. My name is Todd Nienkerk. I'm a digital strategist and partner at 4 Kitchens. Here's how you can contact me. There's my Twitter handle. Let's get on with it. So I am here today because I want you to rethink the role of designers, the purpose of a CMS, and how we manage and consume content. We're going to talk about what designers actually do. We're going to talk about the tension between a design and a CMS, what headless really means for those of you who aren't familiar with headless or decoupled architecture, when it makes sense to actually implement, and what's beyond that. So let's start with what designers actually do. In the olden days of the web, there were webmasters, and websites were measured in pages. Who remembers that? I have a website, 3 pages. I have a 17-page website. How much is that going to cost? And each of these pages were maintained by hand in HTML, and they were uploaded to a server through FTP, or if you were lucky, some kind of a WYSIWYG type editor like Dreamweaver or FrontPage. But today's websites are dynamic, they are ever-changing, there is content being added to them on a regular basis through users, through commenting, through feeds that are ingested in the site. Today's websites allow site maintainers to create and edit content, set user permissions, connect with other services on the website itself. It's a piece of software running on a server. And that's because today's websites are actually web systems. So for a while, we had this dynamic duo of designers and developers. And depending on where you stood, you were either Batman or Robin. But today, there's a new player. Today's websites are so complex and the internet is so complicated and there's so many new technologies that we've seen the rise of an entirely new skill set, and that is the front-end developer. And the front-end developer is the person who handles markup, CSS, JavaScript, and maybe a little bit of PHP. So the question then is, if that's what front-end developers now do, what's the role of a designer on a web project? Fundamentally, designers determine a site's functionality, not developers. A lot of people assume that designers make things look nice and developers make things work. And because they're the ones making things work, they must decide what will work. But that's not actually true. Designers, not developers, determine functionality, and we explain this functionality through a handful of tools: sitemaps, wireframes, user flows. And even a little tiny link on one of these documents that a designer creates tells a really complicated story. So I want to give you an example. This is a really typical wireframe that we've all seen at some point, right? It's a website. This website is easy to make. This website is hard to make. Here's the difference. Easy, hard. Do you see it? Login link. 2 words, 6 characters including the space. Takes a designer a fraction of a second to type in and put into a wireframe. But those 2 words, that one link, tells an incredibly complex story. So in the first version of the site, it's just content, maybe some tagging, and it's a bit of a blog, and so there's an editor and all these things. But when you have to log in, when you have a public login link, you're saying that people must be able to obviously create accounts and log into those accounts. But they have to be able to reset their password if they forgot it. And if they have to reset their password, that means that they have to get an email. So your server has to be able to send emails, and your website has to communicate with an email system. What if those emails get blacklisted and they're sent to the spam folder? That's another thing you got to deal with. So how do you make those emails look legitimate? And then what about permissions? So clearly somebody logging into the site isn't able to maintain the site themselves. That would be an admin's job. But if you're an average reader of a blog, you shouldn't be able to delete users. That'd be crazy, right? So you have to have a permission schema. So you have to check that schema against a certain user's credentials. Then there are privacy issues. So if you have an account, then you probably have a profile. And then what information do you display publicly? What do you have to hide? Obviously, you don't want to show that person's email address publicly. But it's the designer's job to answer all of these questions because a designer is a site's primary architect. That's the role. But there's a tension that we face as designers. It's a tension between the design that we're working on and the CMS that we need to build it in. It feels a bit like this. But it's not clear, really, who plays what role. We ask ourselves, should our design be optimized for our CMS? Or do we modify the CMS to work with our design? In other words, are you walking the dog, or is the dog walking you? And there are two philosophies for handling this problem, and both of these are very real. I've overheard these, I've talked to dozens of shops over the years, and everybody faces this dilemma. And there are two schools of thought, two philosophies. The first is the CMS first approach. And that's just what most technologically oriented shops, like Four Kitchens, tend to believe in. And that is that the user's needs are important. They're very important. We should pay attention to them. But there are many, many, many ways to satisfy those needs. The design, therefore, can be changed to align with the natural behavior of the CMS in order to create something that's easier and cheaper to maintain. So who here has received a wireframe or a design schematic or something that has title and body and byline and all these little bits of information, and next to each one of these little fields, there's a pencil icon? Have you seen this? Do you know what that means? When you see a little pencil icon next to a field? Edit. And when it's next to one field and next to every field on the page, what does that imply? Inline editing. Can Drupal do inline editing well? No. Aqua has sunk a ton of money into trying to make this work with Spark. There are some CMSs that do it, and there are some CMSs that don't. And Drupal doesn't really work that way. When you want to edit a node in Drupal, you click Edit, and you see everything. You see every field. You may change one character in one field, but you're resaving the entire node in Drupal. So we occasionally receive wireframes that have this little pencil icon next to all of these fields. And we have to explain, well, we're building the site in Drupal. Drupal doesn't do this kind of thing naturally. And to build this functionality for your site, it's going to be very expensive. It's going to take a lot of time to build. And it's going to be difficult for you to maintain long term because there's going to be a ton of custom code. And then when you want to upgrade, you're going to have to upgrade all of that custom work. That's the CMS first approach. So what do? We remove the pencil icon, we remove the ability to inline edit, and we set a new expectation with the users and with the client. CMS first. In the design first approach, the user's needs are paramount. The designer has created an experience and hopefully tested an experience, done research around an experience, and those needs are non-negotiable. Things need to look exactly as they were intended to be. Design must be executed exactly as is. And this gleefully involves hacking the CMS or creating really complicated custom code in order to make that happen. Neither philosophy is wrong, and it depends on where you come from. If you come from a technological background, you're mostly worried about maintainability, cost, security of the code. If you come from a design background, you're mostly worried about the experience of the user. Both are equally legitimate concerns. Maybe we can satisfy both of them. Maybe we can do this through headless architecture. So who here has heard of headless Drupal or decoupled CMSs or anything along those lines? Have you heard this term before? Does anybody here know what that means? Great. This is what it means. This is what most CMS-powered websites look like today. You have a CMS, Drupal or WordPress or you name it, and the front end and the back end are glued together. And what I mean by that is, the back end is where you put all of your content, your data, your functionality. It's the code. The front end is what you see when you load up that site in a browser. It's the interface. It's the display layer. So when you look at an article on a website, that's the front end. Drupal does both. You log in, edit content, change functionality, install modules, add users. That's back-end stuff. Database, code. The front end is what you see when you're interacting with the site. when you look at the content, when you watch a video, when you read an article. And on the front end, we have to design these days for multiple devices. So we have one front end that has to serve lots of different kinds of devices: laptops, tablets, phones. RSS feeds come through the website, not natively from the database. RSS feeds are packaged using the markup and everything that's on the display layer. And on the back end, you're dealing with, obviously there's text content, we're all used to that, blog posts, stories. We have multimedia content, images, digital assets, videos, audio files. And we have some degree of user interaction, commenting, or user profiles, things that users use to interact with the site. What Headless means is that we separate these two layers. So now the CMS is primarily powering the back end, and the front end is something else. The front end is not Drupal. The front end is the head, the back end is the body, and the separation of the two is headless. The most popular front end that we're all used to, of course, is the web. The website is a type of front end. But there are lots of types of front ends these days. So if we really look at the full ecosystem of what we're dealing with, there are websites, native apps, iPhone, Android, Windows Phone. We have various mobile interfaces, so a mobile website. We have feeds, RSS, JSON. There are devices like screen readers. And screen readers these days aren't just for people who have sight disabilities or have limited vision. This is for people who need websites read to them because they're doing text-to-speech on text messages, or they're having their email read to them in the car. Who here has spoken to their phone or had their phone speak to them at some point, right? That's a screen reader. It's not just for accessibility, it is for everybody. But it's kind of funny, though, that screen readers have to go through a website to get their content. So screen reader software, they have to parse all of this markup and JavaScript and CSS and all of this cruft that comes along with just the text and the content, and has to somehow guess where that content really lies. So we, as developers and designers, we employ all these tricks like skip links and special navigation systems and the ordering of markup and all of that to try and make it easier for screen readers. Shouldn't screen readers just go directly to the content and just pull the title and the body and read it and not have to parse a visual medium to create an auditory experience? It's kind of silly, right? You also have Xbox and other internet-connected devices. The Xbox One is kind of interesting because what Microsoft is trying to do is, the name gives it away, create one experience as an entertainment console. So it's got a bunch of HDMI ports in the back. They want you to route your Blu-ray player and your stereo system and your cable box and everything through a video game platform. They also want to connect it to the web. Social media and other closed networks. Facebook is only accessible if you have an account. So you have to sign up to see the content that's on Facebook. Where does most traffic to news websites like CNN and The Atlantic come from, besides native search? Facebook. If you're not on Facebook, you are missing an enormous amount of readership. And then, of course, there are wearables. Until very recently, this was that thing that I just threw in there as a ha-ha. Now there really is a watch, and various watches, but I don't know what's going to happen with that thing, but they exist, so we have to think about it. And these are all connected to the back end using an API. This is the future of the CMS, where all front ends are first-class citizens, not just the website, and where everything starts with content. Content first. That's what Headless looks like. So when does it make sense to actually deploy it? Because it doesn't make sense in most cases. First, Headless makes sense when you want to adopt cutting-edge front-end technologies. Brand new experiences, interfaces, JavaScript libraries. This is the current state of a lot of CMSs. You have a back end and a front end that is both safe, repeatable, known, expected. Drupal is a tried and true platform. It works for enterprise applications. It's been vetted by the DoD, it's used by the White House, it's for real. But it's a little boring in that sense. The front-end technologies that come with Drupal 7 right now are old, years old. 4, 5, 6 years old, way out of date by web standards. Not really all that mobile friendly, hard to work with services. You have to install a separate module just to be able to get content directly out of the database through an API. The other option is you go bleeding edge tech everywhere, right? Let's do a crazy new database system and this brand new CMS that was invented 15 seconds ago. And let's throw all this Node and Angular and Meteor and all these cool things at it. Rich experience, high risk, high reward. But it's dangerous to do it for both sides. Because what if the database goes down? What if there's a big hack because people haven't really vetted this new database technology like they have MySQL? Or this new scripting language like they vetted PHP? Now you have a problem in the back end. It's a security risk. Here's the Goldilocks solution. Make the back end safe and repeatable, known and expected. And make the front end cool. Because that's how most people interact with websites. 99.99999% of people who go to your website are looking at the front end and never deal with the back end. And they're looking at their site on mobile devices, not on laptops, not on desktops. Headless also starts to make sense when you want to separate your upgrades from redesigns. This is what it looks like currently with a coupled CMS, like WordPress or Drupal. You install a new CMS, you do a redesign. Because you're having to migrate all your content and rethink your information architecture and rethink all of the functionality you have or don't have on your site. So you may as well do a redesign all at once. So now you're going to spend a whole lot of time and energy and effort and money to do this one big redesign and upgrade all at once. Then a few years later, you do it again. Drupal 7 came out. Well, while we're at it, since we're going to have to completely rewrite the theme layer, and there's a whole new API for that, then we may as well do a redesign because we're having to rebuild the theme, so let's do that and push that boulder forward in one giant leap all over again, and you repeat, and you repeat. So when you want to do a redesign, it winds up getting tied to an upgrade, and you're looking at 3 to 5 years in between being able to do that. If it's decoupled, first you have to get off on the right foot, right? You have to actually set up the new CMS and do a redesign, but now you can separate these two. If you're using Drupal on the back end and something like Angular on the front end, when you want to upgrade Drupal, you're just upgrading the content and the functionality. You don't have to touch the front end at all because it's written in a different piece of software. There is no new front end API that you have to rewrite. There is no theme you have to rewrite. So if you want to do a redesign, you just do a redesign. And then when it's time to upgrade to Drupal 8, you just upgrade to Drupal 8. You don't touch the front end. And then you do another redesign. You're still spending the same amount of time and the same amount of money, but you're doing it at your own pace, and you're able to segment it in different ways. So we'll do the back end today and spend half of the budget I have, and a year from now we'll do the front end. So the front end technologies will be a year newer by the time we're done. You can also be really agile. If you are the kind of organization that has to do a lot of marketing stuff or redesign your website on a regular basis, then you launch a new thing and you just crank out these redesigns. No big deal. Adopt a brand new technology. Make it really lean. Drupal theming is tough, right? WordPress theming is tough. There's a lot of stuff you got to work with. There's a lot of functionality packed into those layers. It's expensive to do. Then you can finally upgrade your CMS a few years later. Then maybe one more redesign. Headless makes sense when you want to centralize your content. Put all of your content in one place. So again, this is where we're at right now. I have my website. It's in a content management system. The content management system stores the content. My colleague Sarah is in a similar situation. She's in a different department. I'm in ecology, she's in natural sciences. Frank over there in comp sci, right? He's got another website. Laura in engineering has one. Everybody's got a website. Who works in an organization that looks something like this? Different departments, different divisions. Everybody's got a completely separate website, right? But you want to share content. Who here works in an organization that has a strategic communications or a marketing department? Those people would love the ability to pull content from all of these disparate sites and syndicate it, or to produce content and have it show up in these multiple places, right? That's the point of strategic communications and marketing, is to have a single voice and a single message around whatever you're trying to do, whether you're a corporation or an institute of higher learning. But this is a mess. This results in copy-paste, broken links. Hey, who wrote that? Google penalizes you because you have duplicate content all over the place. There isn't good metadata that says what the canonical source of the data is. So let's rethink that. So we're going to separate these, right? Let's make it headless. Let's start with that. I'm going to build a front end, and I'm going to put my content in Drupal, in a CMS. And it's separate. That's going to be my content hub. So here I am with a website, and there's a content hub that exists separately from my website, because my website is just a front end, and I'm pulling content out of it. And Frank and Laura and Bob and Sarah, they all connect to the content hub through an API. This is the same thing we looked at earlier, right? All of our websites are different front ends for the same store of content. Sarah writes an article on her site. It's connected through an API, so it gets sent to the content hub. I see it on a dashboard, and I think, well, I'm in the law school, she's in the medical school. This article is about gene patenting. That's relevant to both of us. I want that article that she wrote to show up on my site as well. It's stored in one place, and the canonical source is Sarah's department. And anytime she makes a change, that change gets sent to the content hub and sent back to me without me having to do anything, automatically updating it. Sarah doesn't have to call me or email me and tell me I changed a word in this article. Can you go get it again? Or there was a factual error that absolutely must be, or there's a faculty member whose name was misspelled, and like, get on it right away. They are angry, right? It just happens automatically. Headless makes sense when you want to publish to many front ends and experiences. This is what we looked at earlier. So same kind of thing. We've got all of our stuff. We have a content hub. So let's say I have a piece of content. It's text. It's an article. Now, I'm one company, but I have all of these things that I have to think about. I have a website. I have various mobile devices and native apps, iOS, Android. There's a screen reader. There are feeds. People subscribe to my website using RSS feeds. I have to think about how that content works. Maybe I'm dealing with devices like Xboxes and wearables, and I have social media accounts, of course. Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. One piece of content in the center, sent everywhere simultaneously. From one content hub, I'm publishing content to all channels. I'm ignoring now wearables and social media because let's say I just don't want to publish this article there. It's Twitter, so I can't publish a 4,000-word essay on Twitter. I could do a link, but there's separate content for that. And speaking of separate content, let's say I have a video. So I've got this great video we just produced. Well, it makes a lot of sense to send that video out to the native app, the mobile website, the website itself. Does not make sense to send a video to a screen reader. Why? Because a screen reader can't read a video file aloud. So you produce a transcript. And the transcript is connected to the video. And when you publish that video, the transcript gets sent out to the screen reader simultaneously. Headless makes sense when you want to make your content easily accessible via an API. Same thing. So I have all these front ends. But I want to create a public API. An API is just a way to interact with something. It's a bunch of code. So I make this public API. Now, why would I want to do that? As a publisher, why would I want to make my content accessible to anybody? Any ideas?
Get it out.
Pardon?
To get it out.
To get it out more? Let's say I'm I'm a publishing company that has a really big fan base, a really, really active fan base. And people love our content. We produce a lot of video and a lot of podcasts and articles and things like that. And people want to take my content and slice it up or remix it or share it on their own site or build their own application. And I allow that because I'm a cool company. Now, fan sites can directly access the content on my site in the content store, just as if they were the native app that I built or the feed that I put together or the wearable tech. Public APIs are also useful for newsreaders. So aggregating services that pull in a lot of content, Google News, things like that. So we did this at Four Kitchens. Who here listens to or watches This Week in Tech? So a few weeks ago, we relaunched twit.tv. Twit.tv, they produce an enormous amount of content, everything from ham radio to Android to web to general tech stuff, reviews and commentary and society and all of that stuff. They wanted to have their content accessible to their fan base using a public API. And in fact, it's the same API that their website uses to display their own content. They're eating their own dog food. Their content is stored in a separate installation, pulled out of the content store to be shown on their website. That same API that makes it show up on the website makes it accessible to every single person in this room right now for your own purposes. So here in their own words is why they chose to go headless. It's faster and easier to create new sites. Web design styles change faster than high fashion, so it's nice to be able to update the site without redoing all the hard work on the back end. Having a complete API would make it easier to do apps. The apps, just like the website, would have access to everything there is to know about Twit in a simple, accessible fashion. By making the API public, we encourage members of our audience to create new things, things we might never have thought of. You could even design a website you like more. Abstracting the content from the presentation seems like a big win. And finally, by keeping Drupal simple and avoiding third-party modules, we can make a more secure and reliable backend that will be much easier to upgrade when future versions of Drupal arrive. Giant slide of links. Case study up there in Leo Lacorte's own words, our blog post announcing it, fully public API documentation of how to do this yourself. And by the way, we open sourced all of it. So here it is in GitHub. We call it Saucier. We are the web chefs after all. So this is an open source Node.js framework for building headless Drupal sites, freely available to all of you right now. So what's next? Because I'd like to make this quick, and I like to leave room for conversation. Here's what I think is happening next. Content absolutely comes first. Content is king, content comes first. Current CMSs manage websites first and content second. When you log into Drupal, what are you met with? User administration, tag stuff, comment moderation, right? Permission schema, a lot of functionality. You're managing your website, not so much your content. And that's fine. But for some purposes, this needs to change. Content strategy is a requirement for every organization. And people think that content strategy is a bit of a like woo-woo kind of, what does it really mean? Content strategy is very simple. What are you saying? Who are you saying it to? And why? If you don't have a content strategy, what are you doing on the web? You have to know what you're saying to whom and why. It's that simple. And finally, content modeling, meaning creating data structures on what the content looks like, how it interacts with other pieces of content, what tagging systems or whatever are shared, is really key to building a robust digital strategy that allows you to syndicate content, publish content to multiple devices and experiences. So you write a blog post, well, that blog post will need to show up on your website, be accessible through a native app. You're going to need to be able to tweet a link to it, post it on Facebook, maybe on LinkedIn. And each of those things has a different audience. Each of those things has different limitations. Twitter has 140 characters, right? You have to write different headlines. You have to write different teasers, different summaries for all of these media. You have to model that content. Put it in your site so that it all just happens. 2, we must design for experiences, not just devices. Devices allow you to experience something, but they are not the experience themselves. What I mean by that is, about 5 years ago, when the iPhone really became a thing, and people really were using it to look at websites, and it wasn't so much an early adopter toy, and Android soon followed suit, there's been this proliferation of devices like the watch, cars that are connected to the internet, cars that have Wi-Fi built in. Those are experiences. Who here has tried Google Glass back when it was a thing? Has anybody done that? Anybody put on a pair? What did you think?
It was like nothing I ever experienced before.
Completely different.
New.
Did you like it or did you not like it?
It was a little too freaky for me.
A little freaky.
Yeah, it was like stupid eyeing for the first time.
Interesting. I haven't heard that one. I like that. I found it interesting, really unique, and kind of useless. Like, okay, neat. I'm done with that now, right? The only thing I found useful about it was the map. Because as I turned, the map would adjust, and I knew where I was going. That's really useful. A heads-up display while you're walking around or driving to figure out where you are. Better than looking at your phone, especially while driving, right? Way safer. But the texting and the video and the camera and all that stuff and having to talk to it and like do this whole thing, it was kind of odd. It was really neat, right? It was cool that they put it out there, and it's an interesting experiment, and someday it will yield something. But that is an experience, not a device. What will the experience of a heads-up display be like? What happens when we have the strangest thing I found about Google Glass was having to do this thing to navigate, or this, which just everybody looks weird when they're using one. So that was everybody's biggest complaint. What if we had navigation devices that could be, set up in our fingertips, and we could navigate just by rubbing our thumb and forefinger together, or tapping them, and that's a click. Or I'm scrolling right now. Right? That's going to happen. There are already gloves being built. I mean, this is going to be for real. How do you experience a website on a heads-up display when you're touching it like this, right? Designers have to think about what that's like. What is a film like? What is I was at Oculus Rift 2 months ago, and they gave me a demo of the latest generation of that virtual reality thing. I hadn't done virtual reality stuff since the days of Dactyl Terror in the mid-90s. Does anybody remember that? It made everybody sick and nauseous. It was a huge, massive headset thing, and they'd have to hold it up in pulleys because it was so heavy. The Oculus Rift thing, they did a lot of neat things. You look around and all of that. The thing that blew me away, though, was they showed me a film that was made by some people that used to work at Pixar. A film made for the Oculus Rift. A 360-degree film. Okay? What does a director do? What's the role of a director in a traditional film? To set the frame, to guide the eye. What happens when you cannot guide the eye because people are looking all over the place and behind them and below them? How does a director guide the eye? What's the role of a director in a 360-degree virtual reality film? They use cues. This is designing for experience and not device. It's not about 320 pixels wide. So in the Oculus Rift, in this film, you're standing there, and there's this rustling noise behind you. It happens once. I'm busy looking around. There are fireflies and there are cool things happening. I'm watching all that. Then the rustling happens again. So I turn and something leaps out of the forest. It's waiting for me to look at the sound, and it uses the sound as a cue to get my attention. So then this thing comes by, and then this firefly shows up in front of me and goes over here. So I look at it, and then it goes over here. And suddenly I see the credits. It's guiding my eye. And now the director is more about getting your attention than deliberately saying this is what we're going to look at. They also had a demo of a Cirque du Soleil filming that they did, where you're watching Cirque du Soleil, right? And there's a bit of an Easter egg. If you turn around and you look at the audience, because you're in the audience, right? It's empty, but there's a janitor cleaning up. And the janitor stops and looks at you and waves. Because it knew that you were looking. It's pretty cool, right? That's designing for experience. We need to do that with content. That's what we will have to deal with in the near future when we're dealing with virtual reality websites. Anybody know what language it'll be built in? Any ideas? If you have a 3D environment, right? What are you going to program your website in? What's the front-end technology there? What already does queue-based three-dimensional rendering? Gaming engines. 3D gaming engines. Websites soon, one front end for websites will be 3D gaming engines. Pretty crazy. Okay, that's an aside. Front-end technologies, speaking of, are accelerating, and CMSs simply cannot keep pace. When CMSs lock back-end technologies to front-end technologies in a single package, the front-end technologies, by the time it's actually published, are already out of date. By the time Drupal 7 was released, I think like jQuery and some other things were already a couple versions behind, right? How many people here have installed the jQuery update module? Like 1 million times, right? This is why. These two things move at different paces. So why lock them together? As a result, CMSs, content management systems, need to double down on content, not display. Therefore, we will see a rise of what I'll just call WMSs, website management systems, or services like Squarespace. Anybody here use Squarespace? You should try it. It's actually pretty slick. And it's a really good tool if you want a small, easy-to-use website and cheap that people can maintain themselves. It's actually pretty cool. We, as people who build custom websites, can't compete with that. If people don't need custom websites, they don't need us. And finally, we will see a return of small static websites. So back in the olden days of the web, websites were measured in pages, and we used FTP to upload them. Well, now, websites are measured in pages, and we use GitHub pages to host them. This is coming back. Who hasn't ever installed Drupal or WordPress or something for a 3 or 4 page marketing site? And then a year later, you're like, oh, I got to upgrade. Why did you do that to yourself? Like in retrospect, we all did that because it's like everything should be a CMS. So we've seen this trajectory from 1993 until about, 2003, 2005. Everything was a static website unless it was a heavy-duty Java-based enterprise-level website like Amazon, right? Then open source CMSs and people who could manipulate CMSs and all of that, CMSs had this incredible renaissance where everything became a CMS. WordPress was released, and Joomla, and Drupal, and all the rest. And you're like, why wouldn't you use a CMS? Because then I can make a website for you, and you can log into it, and you can make changes to it yourself, and you don't have to call me, the webmaster, to make all these edits and do whatever. That's why we adopted CMSs, right? People wanted to be able to edit their own content through the web browser itself. But now people are starting to wonder, but there are all these other things like Squarespace where I just pay a subscription fee and I just manipulate stuff, or I'll just fire up a Tumblr, right? Why do I need to install WordPress or Drupal to do this tiny little thing that will only exist for 6 months? It's a marketing site. Who cares, right? Just make it static. And front-end developers and designers, who are the people who make these things, they don't want to deal with installing software on a server. That's not their core skill set. So why deploy a a tool that requires 3 people to make, a designer, a developer, and a front-end developer, when you really just need something that's markup and JavaScript, right? A front-end developer can do that in an hour. Why do you need a team of 3 people working for a week to get it set up? So we're seeing a return of this. It's not going to replace the CMS by any stretch, but we're now seeing a new philosophy of, let's create a suite of tools that we can deploy. Let's not have one tool in our toolbox that we'll deploy every time we need a website. I'm going to use Drupal for my big custom sites or that require lots of points of integration or have big community around them and lots of user interaction. Maybe I'll use WordPress when I just need to do a super quick, snappy blog and have a huge library of themes out there that I can choose from, right? Awesome, WordPress is great at that, done. And then for the super small sites that don't need any user interaction and don't require any content updates to speak of, really, I'm just going to create a static site and I'll do it in Jekyll or something and host it on GitHub Pages, and I'm done. And by the way, I'm going to teach you Markdown so that all you have to do is just do a little bit of, typography, like an asterisk, and it's created an unordered list. We're done. Great. That's where we're at today, and that's why we will see a return of small static websites. We have a few minutes for questions. Any questions? Or anything you disagree with?
How is Drupal 8 moving with helping out with Headless stuff?
Well, I would suggest that to answer that question, you attend my colleague's session on Headless Drupal architecture patterns immediately after this in room 238. Broadly, what Drupal 8 is doing to improve this is it's taken the idea of services, which is currently a module available for Drupal 7, and it's baked it into core. So Drupal 8 is very much built around the idea that people will want to interact with its content using different front ends or through an API. So this architecture is actually really built into Drupal 8 core.
I guess you were talking about, to some extent, you are decoupling the back end and the front end. You're talking about, when you upgrade a Drupal 8 or something, you'll upgrade the back end. You don't really need to change the front end. But it seems to me that you also have to, design the back end so that it outputs the same thing and the same services.
That's true.
So,
Admittedly, I was oversimplifying a little bit. Okay. So what you wind up having to do is there are actually 3 layers to a headless implementation. There's the front end, the back end, and then there's the glue that sticks the two together. And that can be achieved on either end. So if you're upgrading from, say, Drupal 7 to Drupal 8, it may be a relatively minor change because you'll have to maybe, the data object that you get on Drupal 7 will be different than Drupal 8, but it's still Drupal. It still has the fundamental principles of entities and nodes and fields and things like that, so it won't be too alien. But if you switched from Drupal to some kind of proprietary Java system, well, then it's probably going to look completely different. So you'd have to rewrite that layer that says, okay, well, what is the name of the field for the title of the article, and what's the name of the field for the body of the article? And you'll have to rewrite a little bit of that stuff. But ideally, and hopefully, it's a relatively small amount of work. And if you've designed a good API, because that is the API that you have to write, and if you've designed a good one, it'll be pretty robust. Yes, sir?
As new technologies are discovered, you find new content types are discovered.
That's an interesting question.
You may have to not only affect the back end, but also the front end.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Do you have a specific example of a type of content that's relatively new?
You take, used to be static slides you used to have. Now you have movies, video content. So as technology progresses, you will have video content, which was not recognized before.
Mm-hmm.
So exactly when you realize the content type, new content type, you are affecting the front end also.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why any good content management system is hopefully going to organize content in a way that allows you to extend to new types of media. So, in the earliest days of Drupal, I'm thinking the early 2000s, video, audio, and stuff like that, it wasn't really a thing. But what you could do at that point is you could embed a YouTube link If you actually had video that you could download, you could add a field through a crazy, you'd have to write your own module back in those days, right, before the Fields API really was a thing. But absolutely, content management systems have to change with the content that people are demanding. And there are trends in content as well. So I'd say that a more timely example would be other channels and social networks that come and go. So how do you create a content model that is flexible enough to, when Snapchat suddenly is a thing, like how do we make our content Snapchatty, right? And how do we interact with that service? Is it even possible? So your content management system should be robust enough to be able to provide you with the fields to fill that out, and hopefully Snapchat has an API that lets you send stuff to it. I don't know, actually, I haven't really messed with Snapchat that much. But your system has to be flexible, and you do have to change the front end and the back end to keep up with emerging trends. But I'd say more than new types of media that emerge, it's probably much more likely that we experience new types of social networks or types of interaction that we then have to add in afterwards.
You mentioned about the public APIs, and the content type is essentially packaged with the public APIs.
I don't know the answer to that, I'm sorry. Yeah, I would suggest, actually, my colleague who's giving this talk is one of the people who helped advise on the writing of that API, so he would be able to answer that for you. Sorry about that.
Do you envision private APIs too?
Private APIs? Sure, yeah, they already exist. I mean, the only difference between a private and public API is whether you're giving access to other people and whether you document it or not. Private APIs already do exist for social networks. So if you want to post directly to Twitter, well, that's well, is that technically a private API? A better example would be if, say, Twit were to partner with another media company in an exclusive way to say, we're going to give you a particular kind of content that only you can get. It'll show up on our site and only your site, and that's it, and it won't be available in the public API. That would technically be a private API. But at that point, it might just be a matter of permissions to say, like, here's a whitelist of the people who can access a certain kind of content, and if you're not on that whitelist, you can't actually see it or know that it exists. That would be, I imagine something like that's probably happening all the time right now. Sure. Thank you very much, everybody. I'll be up front if you have any additional questions. Otherwise, I encourage you to see my colleague Mike speak. Thank you.